Okay, great. And we will record this session and I'll share the video. And I see Graham Ross has joined us. Thank you, Graham, from the UK. Graham is hopefully soon will be one of our new board members at ICODR. So we're excited about that. So and Jan, the head of our governance committee, has joined. Just Jan, keep me honest, but what we're currently doing at ICODR is we are rolling over a few of our board members and bringing on a couple new board members. So we're in the midst of that process. I think the slate of new board members that have been proposed includes Graham in the UK and Morenike Obiforendi, who is based in Lagos, and Alberto Elizavetsky, who is in Buenos Aires. So we're excited to have them join the board soon, and we plan to have a board meeting at the end of January to sort of get them up to speed. But one of the things that we are looking at in terms of new standards is around IT security, and that's why this this member meeting is so timely. So with that, why don't I actually hand it over to Wendy? And Wendy, if you can kick us off and just give a few words about what you're doing with CyberArb. I think you have the ability to share your screen if you've got any slides you want to show too. So
yeah,
there you go.
So great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Colin, for this very nice introduction. As I said before, good evening, all the way from Amsterdam. My name is Wendy Gonzales, founder of CyberArb. This is basically an initiative that start having a bit the concern of cybersecurity on our daily practice. As you can see here, the main message from us is don't be the weak link. Try not be in that situation, let's say. That's why CyberArb is having as a mission to create awareness and create a very practical guidance, best practices that we can find about cybersecurity in international arbitration, mediation, ADR. As you can see on the right side of the slide, our guardian angel, our mentor is Sofina Pert. She was the one who embraced us since the beginning. We have a core team, which is very multidisciplinary. One of the team members is here, so Karina, hello, over there. She's based in London, and as you can see, what we aim is to have a very diverse team, not only with a legal commercial background, but also with a more specific technical background. So when we prepare our material, what we do, we interview, we have a meeting with developers, we have a meeting with engineers, people who is really behind the scenes, and that can really help us to better understand all this. So said that, I would like to give you a few numbers. You might be aware that this pandemic simply accelerates what we know of, what we can say the arbitration 4.0 or the fourth industrial revolution that is happening nowadays. This pandemic, this coronavirus pandemic, just accelerates everything. In the sense that nowadays international arbitration or any other type of ADR can happen fully online. This was the last step, and we can all see that on these virtual hearings, for example. Two more numbers for you. According to the 2020 official cybersecurity report, there is about $6 trillion that were calculated on damages for attacks to businesses. And to give you an even better number, there is a cyber attack every 11 seconds. And just to make it a bit more visual, you can see this picture. There are many live maps that you can check online and just check the number of attacks in one day. So this is just a way to wake up the community and make sure that we all are aware of this topic. And of course, in my case, I am disputes and litigation counsel specialized on arbitration for a technology company, which means that we are always on the front line. So we know that this is a topic that sometimes we don't pay attention, but it's there, and we just need to be prepared. So said that, I didn't want to take too much time. As Colin said, we want this to be very dynamic. And basically, this last slide is showing you a bit what we expect is going to be the future waiting for us. Those hybrid meetings where you have people sitting face to face, you have a projector with a camera, other people joining via video call like we are doing now. So this is the future. Let's say that this is just going to stay with us. And we can take advantage of this, of course, but then we need to be careful to properly understand what we have to do when it regards to cybersecurity. So, as I said at the beginning, CyberArb is creating awareness and guidance. How do we do it? So far, we have our LinkedIn page. We are constantly developing material over there, but at the same time, we are working on our own website, and we really encourage you to be able to participate, to feel free to contact us anytime, and we are going to be more than glad to keep in touch. We also prepare a few workshops, we prepare some materials, so from time to time I think that our path will cross, because this is just one topic that will stay. And we were discussing with Colin that maybe 2021 is the year of technology, so let's embrace it. So said that, Colin, I didn't want to take too much time.
No, wonderful, Wendy.
So,
thank you.
All yours.
And as you said, we've actually crafted a set of discussion questions. If and we're eager to hear your thoughts from the perspective of CyberArb and your team on that. But I applaud the work that you're doing. I think it's very, very important. And in the conversations I'm having in the international arbitration sphere, I think the #1 concern people have is around IT and data security. So you're on the front lines of that. And I think whatever ICODR does in this space, Wendy, we're going to want to do it in conjunction with your team at CyberArb. So thank you for your efforts. So if you don't mind, I'm actually going to take back the screen, and I have a couple of screens to share, and then I want to hand it over to Andy because he's got some thoughts as well. But hopefully, if I click the right buttons, is everybody looking at a screen now that says ICODR?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So in essence, again, we're all aware within ICODR about the ethical standards we've established for ODR. Several of those ethical standards do touch on information security, and in particular, confidentiality, security, transparency. Now, in Silicon Valley, it's funny, I almost never hear people talk about confidentiality, but I do hear lots of companies talk about privacy. And they're related, but not exactly the same concept. Now, IT security is a very hot topic in Silicon Valley. And I think now, especially, the cyber war seems to be ratcheting up. I was in a forum the other day, and someone was saying, I bet soon we're going to be paying more for cybersecurity than we pay for physical security for many businesses and government agencies. So we already have been talking about these things in the ICODR context, but we've not been very specific in terms of where the rubber hits the road. If all of us as ICODR members and online mediators, we say that we're going to follow these ethical guidelines, we need to be much more practical and actually prescriptive in a sense about what this means if we are to ensure confidentiality, privacy, and the security of our parties' data. Now, people have said to me, you also have transparency in the ICODR standards, and isn't transparency in conflict with confidentiality? And I think obviously at a meta level it is, but usually what we talk about when we talk about transparency is transparency of the process, transparency of the platform, even transparency when there is, for instance, a data breach. It's very important we be transparent with our users and our parties about that. But at the same time, we need to protect the confidentiality of our parties' data, particularly their personally identifiable information. So they need to know that we as online mediators and online arbitrators and online ODR platform designers, that we are taking IT security seriously and that we're abiding by a set of best practices that can reassure them that it's okay for them to participate in these online processes. Now, remember at the beginning when we were talking about Zoom, everybody was obsessed with Zoom security. Is Zoom secure? How do I know that people aren't listening in on my conversations? And parties were asking that question a lot. And you saw that Zoom aggressively invested in their security because they kind of got knocked because they did not provide end-to-end security. Well, now they do offer end-to-end security as an option because they know that security is of paramount importance to their users. But this is something that we in the ODR space, I think Wendy speaks to it very compellingly. There's questions around if an arbitrator, for instance, administers an online arbitration process, a virtual arbitration process, and does not adequately account for IT security, that may be a reason why the outcome of that process could be challenged. Or parties would not want to work with that arbitrator again because there is sensitive information being exchanged as part of that process. So I want to hand it to Andy in a minute, but I just want to get very practical for a second and talk about, well, what are all of us doing? We're all doing online mediations. We're all doing online arbitrations. And I'm sure many of us are using these tools: email, calendar invites, Word documents, Skype calls, Zoom calls, Google Docs, text messages, maybe even social media platforms. And the challenge is all of these tools have very significant security concerns. Just like Zoom, there are ways to make each of these channels more secure, but there are serious vulnerabilities for the use of these. And I think a lot of mediators who they said, okay, well, now I have to move my practice online. They're essentially using email and Zoom for most of their party interactions. And there are a lot of security challenges that are associated with the use of particularly email and cloud-based document platforms like Dropbox and Google Docs. So just as an example, email security. Emails travel unencrypted across multiple networks and servers around the world before they reach the audience's inbox. So that means somebody could theoretically intercept those emails en route, and servers will often hold emails, and then parties will then download their emails to their local computer. But not all of those servers are set to delete those emails once they're downloaded. So sometimes you can go onto a mail server and you'll find emails from years ago. And particularly savvy hackers and people that are trying to compromise systems, that was the way that, for instance, the DNC hack in the United States occurred. People, an email was sent out and someone clicked the link and they went to a spoof website. So the other thing about email is once your account information is compromised, that bad guy can get all future, that bad actor can get all past emails and future emails potentially. So there's huge damage to having one bit of information compromised. And now people are passing their emails to their phones and their watches and their refrigerators. I mean, it's amazing where people are sending all their emails. So there are multiple points of vulnerability. You can protect your computer quite thoroughly, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're protecting your mobile phone and your watch and all these other channels. The other thing is when an email is sent with personally identifiable information in it, the sender cannot stop that email from being forwarded to multiple people. So if a party, for instance, forwards an email to a friend and say, can you believe this? Then that friend could send it out to 100 people and the original sender would never know. So we have to think about how we are utilizing email in our ODR processes because of some of these concerns. And there are ways for us to use more secure text-based communications channels. And we just need to think about this and make suggestions to practitioners and provide tools to people. And obviously best practices around things like two-factor authentication or complex passwords, that's fine. That's fine. I think that kind of IT security hygiene is important. And we as mediators, there are things that we can do to make sure that we don't unintentionally use email to violate someone's confidentiality, like not forwarding long threads of emails, not emailing attachments, using web-based platforms to do information sharing, but then also being clear with our parties about their obligations around data security. So I'm actually going to stop there. We have a lot more in this deck, and we have a lot of discussion questions that we want to raise with all of you. But I wanted to open it up to Andy for a moment, because I think Andy has been doing the most advanced thinking of anyone in the ODR community around the importance of security and ODR. So Andy, I just wanted to give you an opportunity. Do you have any slides that you want to share?
Yeah, thank you very much, Colin. I do have some slides, but let me.
Great. There you go. Yep.
And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much, Colin, for this presentation. And I think Wendy and Colin made a very good foundation for me to carry on this topic. Before I go into the technical detail, I just like to give you a few examples of what are the big risks of the digital security. And I think in the past couple of years, we observed many major impact of the digital security problem. And the first one is you all know the Boeing 737, and I think all this disaster and the crash now is at least partially because of the software system, they engaged in this two model. And now they do a lot of, they did a few upgrade of the software system, but people are still very scared. And what we learned, the lesson we learned from Boeing is that there is no any very good regulation to guarantee the software in Boeing airplane can be function correctly all time. And just because of the technology changing so fast, and all your measurement, all your regulation has to go with the IT technology. But you all know IT technology is incredible, particularly for this Boeing model. The reason why the software is hard to regulate, to check, to make sure it's correct, because it's engaged with artificial intelligence, with some sort of like intelligent engagement. So once the machine has intelligent, like people, what the difference between intelligent and not intelligent is the learning capability. So when the machine when the software starts to learn, then that means every second the software is different from the second before. And that is where the big risk were introduced. And just like the Boeing things, the software originally maybe is all right. There is no any problem, no any defect. But after 20,000 flights, the software start to upgrade itself, start to learn things, and that's where but the regulation agency cannot check every iteration. So that's where the risk come in. The second one is pretty near, is the domino voting machine, and I have recently watched a few episodes in Netflix. I see, actually in 1989, Mexico president election, they already disclosed the major fraud because of the voting machine. And this time they start to, I think, some sides start to point to the voting machine problem. And I think the major problem is, how do we ensure the voter, this machine is perfect, or what is perfect? And what kind of risk this machine bring to the voting system? But there is no any. It's just now there is no any right way to present that, and people don't know what is right, or what is a perfect voting machine, what is a defect voting machine. There is no any certification, there's no any insurance, and so they just put this machine in there. So now it's very easy to be blamed, because machine is it cannot talk. Then the third one is what Colin has just mentioned, Zoom. And the Zoom things, so far it's no problem, but why it's run into some issue.
So Andy, I'm sorry to interrupt, but are you scrolling through your slides, because we still
No, I didn't.
You're not there starting yet. Okay, I just wanted to check and make sure. Okay, got it.
Yeah, the Zoom problem now recently come up is not because the system has any defect. I mean, maybe a system has defect, but this time it's not. It's because one of the employee somehow transferred the information of the Zoom client to the other country, to the foreign country. So that actually breached the security of the whole system. So that means one of the operator of a digital system does something. I'm not sure it's illegal or not, because really there's no any regulation saying they cannot do that. But does something like this is actually pose risk to this whole system. So we see for this three example, we see a system defect because of the software iteration. We see the insurance problem. People don't know what is, how get the people trust this machine. Third one is the operator may also pose risk. So those are the some typical example for digital security I have been doing research on. So now let's make some comparison. And I think ICODR came up with a standard for ethic. And what's the standard for ethics does? it's to basically, I think in my interpretation, is to regulate the human mediator to do the right thing, right? So now we know the ODR start to move from pure human engaged to human plus IT system engaged. So we have ethics standards from ICODR to regulate human behavior. So we have to have some sort of standard to regulate the IT system engaged in the ODR. So this is what digital security in the online dispute resolution. And we want to make sure all the digital system we engaged in the ODR process have to have at least equivalent ethics standard as human. And then we start to ask, what are these digital systems we engaged? I think Colin and Wendy said many, like email, like the chat, or some intelligent mediation program, or even Google. We go to search for the reference material. So there are many digital systems are currently engaged in the ODR process, and they are just like human, have to behave as ethic as the human being. So that is the digital security for the online dispute resolution. So I quickly go through some of the website I prepared, and so this is a list of what are the risks of the digital system. Here I want to point out one of the important one that has not been thoroughly researched on is algorithm ethics. Algorithm ethic means in your intelligent or in your IT system, did you put some algorithm to distinguish, to violate, or to leak the information, or to post any risk? For example, some ethic may put some algorithm that discriminate against certain people. That's a risk. That's going to create a risk for the whole ODR process. And then there are a lot of unauthorized intrusion, unauthorized use of the data, and unauthorized transfer of the information. So those are the risk. I mean, these are part of the risk posed by the digital system. And so for the digital security in ODR, basically is just as I said, is when we engage digital system in our ODR process, we have to make sure they at least this digital system at least will behave as good as a human, and has to bind by the same, at least the same ethical standard as a human. And but because the digital system is used by everybody, so we have to post a higher standard than the human ethics standard. And then there are a few examples, like the system security and the trackability. That means because the human can be recorded by its behavior by many, because we people are observing them, and their clients, their colleagues. But for system, how do we track their behavior? And so that in the future we can go back to see whether they are doing a good job or they pose some risk. So the trackability is very important, and that is number one thing. So we see in all the mission critical digital systems, such as the airplane system, they always have something like a black box. That is to track the system, make sure we in the future we could, in any incident, we can go back to looking for a problem. And the data security and the trust words, these are again important things. And we want to make sure data is in a good hand. Data is in the authorized hand. And how do we trust? How do we know this data? When we send the information to our client, the information is not directly sent to the client. The information is sent to the email server, and that is operated by a company. Then once the email gets to the server, then it's get transferred to to the client. So that means there is a party involved in any data transfer process, and are they secure and are they trustworthy? So that's another issue we need to think about. So to manage digital security, we have to do these many things, and many of them are mentioned by Wendy and Colin. I think they are just the general security things. I think you can compare with what we did in the human ethic standard for the mediation process. And then there is another example for how do we create a trustworthy database or a untrustworthy database. What's the risk is posed? And I think it's too detailed, and I just probably we can discuss some other time. So thank you very much. These are I just gave a quick introduction to what digital security is, and I think Colin has some other agenda.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andy. As I said, I think Andy is really he's on the leading edge in the ODR field of thinking what secure ODR means and all of the different aspects of IT security that we need to think about in the field. So let me actually bring it back to my slides. And then we've actually crafted a series of discussion questions that we'd like to raise on the call, so we can bat these around. A couple other things that I want to address in particular is video. I mean, we mentioned this before. I think online dispute resolution, online arbitration, online mediation has really become synonymous with video mediation, video arbitration, particularly in the, I think on the arbitration side. If you look at the large international arbitral institutions from the ICC to ICODR to HKIAC, when they talk about virtual arbitration, really they're talking about virtual hearings, and they're talking a lot about, and so these video conferencing systems, we're dependent on third-party platforms like Zoom. But some governments don't allow the use of Zoom, so they use platforms like WebEx, or they use GoToMeeting or Microsoft Teams. You know, there's a real proliferation of different platforms. But I think coming up with standards, we already have video mediation, video arbitration standards, but thinking in more detail about what the security risks are. You know, I've seen when we did a training in Cairo for the Cairo Regional Center on Commercial Arbitration, and there was all these questions about, is someone intercepting the feed? Who is controlling the machine? Is location being tracked? You know, who is not on the camera? You know, should we have multiple cameras in the room so you can see? Should you be able to ask your parties to pick up the camera and spin it around so you can see a 360-degree view of the room? You know, there was a lot of talk about Zoom bombing, but I think some of the things that people have done within video conferencing platforms have reassured participants about that. But are there people who are listening in who are not visible on the call is another concern. So I think articulating, again, it may be that we need to look at each platform and then certify individual platforms to say this platform is secure. I know in the trainings that we've done in India and Africa, a lot of people are trying to use WhatsApp. WhatsApp is a secure platform in terms of end-to-end encryption, but it doesn't have a lot of the same functionality that you have on a platform like Zoom. So it may be that we need to have a separate set of recommendations for video and then a separate set of recommendations for platform providers themselves. So again, what we see is also evolution in these platforms in terms of the functionality that they offer. They know that this is a huge concern for their users. So I think we need to kind of match that evolution step for step. So as I'm saying, as I'm noting, ICODR, we are now thinking about what these ODR security guidelines should encompass. So we could put together a one-pager or a two-pager like we've circulated on the ICODR website. And I think what we want to do now is sort of share some of the questions that I think need to be answered in terms of pulling those standards together so that we can all contribute to them and make sure we come up with a document that's really practical for people who are providing ODR services on the front lines. Again, I think I've already talked about video conferencing security, so I'm not going to go through this in detail. But these are some of the questions that we've raised. So maybe now we can sort of open this up for a wider conversation. I'm interested to have Andy and Wendy weigh in on some of these questions, but I think we've been discussing them in the chat as well. You know, Claire raised the question in the chat, you know, should individual mediators and arbitrators online be held liable, in essence, if their email is compromised or confidential information? Are they the ones who are going to be sanctioned should one of these violations occur? So the question that we have is, what obligations do we think individual online mediators and arbitrators have in order to make their system secure? Now, not all of us, just like when you put a security system in your house, we don't all have to have the lasers and the touch sensitive pads and the motion detectors. It might be that we just have to lock our doors and, you know, plant some pointy bushes in front of our windows. Like that may be considered industry standard. Like, and if someone comes to a mediator and says, hey, look, the confidential information in your process was compromised, all the mediator has to do is say, well, look, I took the actions that were in line with the ICODR standards. So I took what was required in terms of reasonable best practices. So even if the information was compromised, if I took those actions, I can't be held responsible. So I think the first two questions are, what obligations do online mediators and arbitrators have? But also the second one is, what obligations do ODR platform providers have? Which I think is probably a much higher bar than the individual mediators and arbitrators. So let me open that up first to Wendy and Andy and see what their thoughts are, and then we can expand it to other participants as well. What do we think we should look at in terms of baseline obligations for practitioners?
Yeah, thank you, Colin. Really interesting question. I would like to start saying that the best way to understand cybersecurity is imagine that it's like a house. So with doors, windows, and different exits and entrance, right? So it's different levels, and that's cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a full set of measures, physical, logistical, administrative, that you put at all levels, not only at the guard door, not only at the front door, you do it everywhere. And sometimes we think that it's about, okay, data, information. It's more than that. It's about the confidentiality, the integrity, the availability of the data, what tech people call the CIA triad. But in any case, the question now is, which is obligation? And to be really honest with you, nowadays, this is a gap because it's a very new topic. Some institutions are starting to draft some guidance on this. The recent London Court of International Arbitration is giving some guidance. ICC is giving some guidance. We have GDPR in Europe. For the ones in Europe, we just have breakfast, dinner, and lunch with GDPR. In any other countries, you might have your own data protection laws. So there is a big field, let's say, to play. But it's something that nowadays we as people with a legal background, of course, it was discussed, we need to do our best efforts, and most importantly, be able to prove it, be able to prove that you really took the measures that were expected from you. Because you, as a solo arbitrator, as a solo mediator, or in a case as a solo counsel, it's reasonable that you don't have the same structure, the same infrastructure of a multinational, of a ODR multinational company. Is reasonable. But then the question is, we have to do it, and then we have to be able to prove it somehow. That might be my very technical point of view. And I see that Karina is also raising her hand. She's one of our team members and arbitrator also. So yeah.
Let's go to Karina, and I see Laura raised her hand too. But Karina, what did you want to say?
Okay, yes, like Wendy said, first of all, yes, certainly in Europe, and I should say also now in the UK, since we are now separate, exactly, the national data protection rules, I think everybody has to abide to. And the point is also that every single arbitrator and mediator should be aware of them and should have show that they've gone through a kind of course or something, get a certification for it. Mm-hmm. I think that is one measure. But I think what is even more important, before we even go into what measures they should take and should show and provide that they do take care or not, is in fact, the first thing we need to do is make every single person aware of it. And a lot of people are not aware of it. And that's exactly the mission of CyberArb, that we make everybody, first of all, aware of that every single mediator, arbitrator, every stakeholder that participates in mediation and arbitration must be aware that some measures have to be taken for cybersecurity. And they cannot hide behind, for example, having Yahoo emails or BT Online or Virgin Net or AOL email addresses, for example. That's the first step, I think, and that everybody can change very quickly, but that they actually have their own individual domains and proper email addresses. I know in the States, for example, quite a number of very large legal firms would not use a mediator or arbitrator now if they can only provide an AOL email address. So we need everything, not only the mediators and arbitrators to be aware of it, but we have to have every single stakeholder to act accordingly. And I think that is very, very important. I could say a lot more, but I'm sure everybody else wants to say similar things. So I say that's it for now from me.
Sure. Let's go to Laura, because Laura, you raised your hand, and then we'll go to Graham.
So, ICDR at AAA has done a cybersecurity boot camp for all of its people. And you actually go there and they act, or in pre-COVID times, you went there and they fixed your computer and they told you all the things you had to do. But bottom line is, for a non-technologist neutral, there needs to be a program that we can buy or that we can subscribe to that is, that is certified by someone that says this is a safe system, it's as safe as we're going to get. And also, I make all the parties sign on to what they think is secure. So these major law firms, they have views of what's secure, and they also have secure systems of their own. If they want to use their secure system, that's what we do. But we do it by agreement. I don't take on the role of dictating what we're going to do. But I would like to purchase a good system that supports security. I haven't had anyone tell me what that is yet.
Well, ODR providers on the call, take note. You have someone who's saying, sell me this. This is what I want to buy. I do think that there is an element of providers and technologists can come up with, these are the things you have to do. Download this program, install it, and we will sit on the wall and make sure that you're protected. I think that I do agree. It's incumbent upon the industry to solve that, and it shouldn't be a responsibility put on the shoulders of each individual mediator and arbitrator. I think your point is well taken, Laura. Graham, what did you want to say?
Well, I'm so old, as you know, Colin, that I remember when email was first being used by lawyers, and the Law Society in the UK had a rule at that time that because of the security issues, lawyers should not use email on confidential client business. Of course, in time, that was quietly ignored and no longer applies, even though the security issues still remain. I think, picking up on Laura's point, I think that the two forms of organizations that perhaps ICODR could be addressing with and engaging with are professional regulators and professional indemnity insurers. So the insurers are going to be picking up the bill for negligence, not following basic standards, or using systems that do not comply. The problem is that we're at a stage at the moment where there are a myriad of different rules and standards to go by. And it may well be that there's a role for ICODR here in pursuing what it's already doing quite well, of course, identifying what those standards should be, not just as to, as you said, not just as to the systems, but as to practice. And I always say to mediators email, it's not just the question of, you've got to be careful about forwarding emails from one party when in the tail there's some private conversations you've had with that party to the other one. Lots of ways in which a busy mediator can make mistakes. So what they need, because we're in this difficult position, we're trying to encourage people to use online dispute resolution. At the same time, we are quite rightly addressing the risks for them when they do. And I think the sort of solutions ultimately will be where we can engage with the regulators and say, look, what are the rules? What are the assignments? What can somebody, as long as he follows those rules, whatever the risks, he's not committing any breaches, he's not breaching standards.
Right.
And then have the insurers to comply with that and agree.
Well, I think that it's interesting. I just Clara knows, we were just looking at directors and officers insurance for Mediate. So I went out to some of these insurance companies, and they said, "Sure, we'll sell you a policy, but you have to do these things. You have to put in an HR manual. You have to do this. You have to do that." I mean, insurers will often be they will require before they give you a policy that you follow some of those best practices. So I think, as Chuck mentioned and you mentioned, Graham, I think insurance is one interesting approach here. All mediators should have cybersecurity insurance, but in order to get that insurance, they have to follow through, just as Laura said, and utilize, you know, the tools that make them secure, because that minimizes exposure for the insurers themselves. Wendy, I see your hands up. What did you want to say?
Yeah, maybe just share with you one of the most interesting insights I got from one developer when I was, you know, very lawyer thinking like, oh yeah, there should be a way, one rule, one software, and that's it. And then he told me something very simple, but it can help you to understand what is going outside. It's not only about one software, one ODR platform, it's also about your own devices, like the physical tools that you have, connecting to the Wi-Fi or connecting without the VPN, not sharing files that are not encrypted. So it's a full set of measures that anyway.
Wendy seems to have frozen there. So, but I think we got the gist of her point. Oh, I'm sorry, Wendy, you froze there for a minute. So just repeat what you said over the last 10 seconds. Well, I think she's frozen again, but I think we got the gist of what you were saying, Wendy. Absolutely. I see some of the points that are being raised also about in the chat about mediator cybersecurity insurance. I think Chuck said it's available for another $50 on top of a lot of insurance programs. I think, let me actually go back to the slides here, because I think this gets to the question that we're trying to answer when we put together these ICODR standards. Are there like 5 things that we could say that mediators and arbitrators not only can do, but should do, that sort of meets the minimum requirements in terms of, if you do these 5 things, then you can say you've met the reasonable expectation in terms of protecting the information of your parties. Another thing that Karina mentions, is there a training that we can do or a certification that we can do? I know, you know, I'm an adjunct professor at a couple law schools, and every year they force us to go through an online web-based training to go through and say, this is what a spoof email is. This is, you know, to just educate you about some of the potential threats that are out there. You know, Andy, I'm interested to go back to Andy, because one of the things Andy's been talking a lot with me about is regulation. You know, should we have regulations that we put in place that say ODR providers have to do these things? Are there regulatory bodies? I mean, obviously, if we're sort of a industry association for ODR, we may come up with our best practices, but those are, you know, people can decide whether or not they want to abide by those and sort of self-audit. But it could be that governments are going to say, all right, look, these are the sorts of things that ODR providers are going to have to do, and will our standards serve as sort of a blueprint for what that looks like? There's more of the pages of these questions. So I think we've already talked about confidentiality, privacy, and security. I think Andy was talking with me about, and maybe I can go to you, Andy, to talk a little bit more about this, system security versus operational security. Can you talk about your sense of what the distinction is between those 2 terms?
Okay, thanks, Colin. I think the obligation has to be discussed after the regulation is defined, or best practice, because without the regulation or best practice are in consensus, it's very difficult to look for the obligation, because the people, we don't have a standard to be obligated. And another big problem is that every digital system introduces a third party. And before, we just talk to each other. Now, once you adopt a digital system, you are talking to between you and your, the person you communicate with. There is a third party, either a software vendor or a software platform operator. So you engage that third party. Then what is the obligation of the third party? That's very important. And as you know, currently the internet, the online platform obligation is very minimal, and that's one of the major problems. That I think there is a law regulates that. It's keep saying like 230, section 230 or something. It's basically the platform doesn't have any liability for things you posted on. So that's make the platform very immune to most of the risk. And so that's make actually this. I start to wondering whether for ODR or something like ODR, that is very important. That I mean, the consequence is very important. We may have to either the industry consortium has to enforce something to the third-party vendors or the platform operator. And so after that, and as I just point out for the Zoom situation, the operator of the platform may be perfect, maybe no defect and no any risk, but the operator, the qualification for the operator or the ethic of the operator may pose to some risk, just like the Zoom situation. They just share the some information with the other unauthorized party. That's posed risk to the user. So I think those are the issue make the security problem very difficult. So because of this, I think the industry consortium, such as ICODR, has to stand up to just like one of the I think the participants said, we just need a secure ODR. Then what is a secure ODR? We just have to list what is a secure ODR. Then I think the industry consortium has to come up to make a recommendation list, just like the airline, like the telecom company. They cannot say you have to buy this, but they come up with a list to say those are the secure vendors, and because they either have this certificate or they have a public confidence. I mean, they have some sense that make them one of the best secure system provider. So that's probably is one of the solution. We have to come up with a full description of a secure ODR. What is a secure ODR? And it's cover what are the aspects it covers.
I love Andy's been coining this term secure ODR, and I think that that's a good, a great way, sort of a thumbnail for us to say what is secure ODR from the provider perspective, from the mediator and arbitrator perspective. What is secure ODR from the platform perspective? And we have some questions to talk about that. I think we've already talked a little bit about whether or not mediators and arbitrators should be held liable for poor practices. I think there is some talk about potentially challenging the outcomes of dispute resolution process purely based on IT security concerns. And that's, I don't know if there's any evidence of that. Wendy, you probably would have your ear to the ground on that. But, you know, I think you could have someone they're trying to be compelled to participate in a virtual hearing, and then one of their complaints may be, look, I don't want to participate in this virtual hearing because I'm not totally sure that the information that I provide through that hearing is going to be adequately protected. But I do think that this is an interesting question, and something that we might, number 9, need to address as ICODR. What disclosure obligations do mediators, arbitrators, and platform providers have in the event of a data breach? So if I'm mediating a case or I'm arbitrating a case, and then I have a concern, my machine gets really slow, and then I run a scan and it says, oh, you've been infected by a Trojan or a worm or a virus. And then I then go and eliminate that virus from my system, but there was a chance that some of the information on my system, maybe my emails or some of the files on my system, were compromised as a result of that. Do I have an obligation to notify my parties? And also, you might imagine, if I've mediated or arbitrated a case and the case is closed, and then a year later, I have a supposed data breach where my system was infected. Do I have an obligation to go back, because the information from that case might still be on my computer? Do I have an obligation to notify the participants in my prior closed processes that I experienced a data breach? Because, you know, what would they do? So I think we need to think through, from an ICODR perspective, what obligations. I mean, we can say that mediators and arbitrators and platform providers have an obligation to be transparent about data breaches. But the question is, how much time do they have? What are the steps when something like that occurs? What type of information needs to be shared? So let me throw that out and see if anyone has any comments or thoughts about that. Merez, please.
Yes, I just wanted to echo a little bit what Laura said earlier. Actually, we have a lot of lists and protocols about security and so on. And I don't know if that is what Laura alluded to, but we have issued an ICC guidance note regarding virtual hearings. And I hear about the arbitrators, I mean, all the comments that have been made about the responsibility of the arbitrators, but we are aware about the fact that everyone shares the responsibility. Actually, it shouldn't be only on the shoulders of the arbitrators. And in the note we have issued, we clearly explained that any issue should be discussed between the arbitrators and the parties, and everyone should agree on every single matter, be it security, platform used, material used, recording, who's going to be in the room, how long is going to last the meeting, and so on. And we also recommended actually that, or at least suggested that hearing centers be used when they have the necessary equipment to offer. And I'm mentioning one of them, I have no interest in there. It's Toronto Arbitration Place. They are equipped, I mean, highly equipped, a center and securely equipped, and they are really good. The interesting aspect of it is that they have people for troubleshooting. And this is also an aspect that need to be addressed when agreeing on hearing or a meeting between the parties and the arbitrators. They need to have a person there for troubleshooting, be it disconnection or any technical issue. So everything should be actually shared in terms of responsibility. It can't always be the arbitrators. They're not alone, unfortunately, to be responsible for that. And the hearing center is also probably partly responsible. So every stakeholder has a part of responsibility. It's not easy, but what Wendy mentioned earlier also is that having a center, having a platform that offers that minimum security for a hearing or for a meeting is obviously helpful. Standards are fine, protocols are fine, guidelines are fine, but it's not enough, because reading them is one thing, and finding the solution or finding the website, the platform that helps you conducting a procedure online in a secure way is very important.
Absolutely, absolutely. I note that Wendy shared in the chat that the disclosure rules under the GDPR in Europe are 72 hours, I think, within a breach. That's a very fast timeline. The other point that I want to make before I go to Graham, and Andy raised this with me on our call the other day, there are cultural differences around security and confidentiality standards. Andy was telling me some of the questions that are routinely asked by websites in China. In the United States, people are very uncomfortable sharing some of that information. But obviously, Europe has more stringent standards than the U.S., and then there are other regions of the world that have less stringent standards than the U.S. as well. So it's kind of a moving target a little bit, which makes it trickier. But I agree with you, Merez. It's a shared obligation amongst all participants. Graham, what did you want to say?
Okay, so I'm a mediator, but if I was a mediator who had absolutely no interest or knowledge about security, just wanted to do my work and gain the benefit of online, I'm not going to want to really feel that I need to do some research on the technology and security issues. All I would want is to know that my insurer, my professional indemnity insurer, and my regulator would have and approve a set of standards that if I just follow those rules, not use a site unless it says this, not do this, whatever, not use email at all. I think that would have to be one email because of the operational difficulties. Then I'll be happy with it. And I think that's the direction we have to go. For so long as, we've got to engage, as I said before, three-way: regulators, insurers, and the practitioners. And so the practitioner has a clear knowledge of what he can do to avoid whatever goes wrong, whatever slip-ups and security breaches will happen, and there will always be those, no matter how much you try to avoid them.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right.
Those pockets, at least he's protected by his insurance.
Yeah, you know, we're running out of time here, as I knew we would. I'm going to send out this deck. As you can see, not only do we have these questions, we have a lot of other questions we need to answer in order to figure out the ICODR standards. How do we reconcile different standards? What should standard setting bodies like ICODR play? You know, how would your party know whether or not their ODR provider is being responsible? Can we do certification? And then Andy asked a lot of really excellent questions about certificate programs and how do you implement secured ODR. So I'll share these slides, but I want to take the rest of our time to actually turn it back to the panelists. I see Karina and Wendy have comments that they wanted to make, and I'll let Andy make one final comment and then we'll wrap it up. Karina, why don't we go to you first?
Yes, I think Graham, thank you very much, Colin. Graham made an excellent point, because none of us are IT specialists. None of us have IT knowledge as such. And I've learned also from experience from, I'm also in a subcommittee of the German Maritime Arbitration Association, where we've also addressed the point, should we make recommendations, which platforms would be more secure to use than others, etc. But then one would fall under liability again. So following from Graham's point, when he says exactly, all I need is my insurance and etc., I can't do the research and everything. We could all do the research, but what would we properly understand of it? So that's I think that's a very important point one also needs to be aware of. And in fact, yes, one could only say these are the commonly used platforms, for example. So if you want to give recommendations or guidelines, one has to be very careful not to expect a certain expertise level of IT or cybersecurity, because that is not our job. Our job is to find dispute resolution and not find cybersecurity resolutions. I think that is something one must not forget when trying to issue guidelines. And I think you can only say guidelines, or if you want to call them standards, we have to be careful that they would not clash with the national standards, for example, because I know, for example, Switzerland would have exactly the opposite standards of certain things than, for example, in derivative trading, for example, than the rest of Europe. And it's exactly the opposite. So we need to be very mindful of the minefields that are out there before one creates such standards.
Absolutely. Excellent points. Wendy, do you have anything you'd like to say as we wrap up?
Yes, just to conclude, I will invite you, if you haven't done it already, you might be aware of the Stockholm survey on virtual hearings. There was already a proposal mentioned by Paul Cohen, and it's about having a secretary for technology, someone that is a tech savvy, able to help. It can be a someone, it can be one secretary helping for that, for example, to the panel, or it could be outsourced to so different many technology companies willing to advise on this topic. Because as Karina said, even if we try, it's not the same that someone with that real expertise is next to us to guide us, of course. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think we need to continue to work on, to research on what's the consequence of digital security from the insecure ODR. So we know what problem going to be created. But as the early e-commerce company, I think what we can do right now for the mediator and the platform operator, we need to implement some safe harbor clause to make sure that we know our liability. For example, if you use email to send out the information, we have to claim, we have to make sure we are doing the right thing. But if the email server had some problems, that is, we have to somehow notify our partners that where is our liability end. And then after that, I think the most important thing is we have something like, like ODR, like ICODR should come up with a best practice for the secure ODR. So to demonstrate how do we rate or how do we assess a digital system that is secure for the purpose of ODR.
Well, it's an excellent place to leave it. I think this is the beginning of the conversation, not the end. This is clearly an important priority for ICODR. Thank you so much, Wendy and Karina, from joining from CyberArb. We look forward to working with you. And Andy, I'm sure you're going to continue to drive this within the ICODR board. Claire and I have been trading messages over the session too, saying what can mediate.com and arbitrate.com do in terms of providing training, certification, and tools. So we will figure this all out together, but thank you very much for the time and engagement today. It's been wonderful to hear everyone's feedback, and let's stay safe out there, everybody. Don't click on any spoof emails and use complex passwords. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Stay well. See you next month. Okay.
Yep. Wendy and Andy, I'm hoping that we can get some of your slides.
Yes, I'll circulate all the slides, and I'll circulate a recording of the session to everyone as well.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Take care. All right.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.